I got that wrong again. I mean, and it's the last time with this particular thing. So it's afternoon tea with Father Lewis and me, and it's Thursday, November the 19th, and it's 3 p.m. Welcome. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We do appreciate you spending your hard-earned time with us for an hour. And it's another beautiful day, although it's getting a bit cloudy. And the dog is with us because he thinks there's a change in the air, and he's not a fan. So he may make some weird noises because he is known to, what's the word?
Exhale.
Well, not
Comment.
just comment, yes, comment. Editorialize. Good morning, Vern, Karen, and Holly. It's good to see you all. So, what's happening with the services this week? Oh, yes, there's Bill as well. Hello. Where are the uniforms? Oh, we just had a bit of a power glitch then. The uniforms, well, mine's in the washing bin.
Mine is too.
So they're waiting to be washed. They will be worn again. We may even do a session that's just called Down the Rabbit Hole. Anyway, upcoming services for this Sunday. Right one at 8 o'clock, right two at 10 a.m., which is live streamed, and the drive-through at 11 a.m. till 11:30. Please continue with the requirements, which is masks at all times as you come into the building, and worn continually while you're in the building, and then as you leave as well. And the social distancing as well. I was at a clericus this morning, or at least a Zoomed a clericus, and they were all saying the same thing. People are really good at wearing the masks, but when it comes to the end of the service, there is a tendency to crowd at the back of the church or not social distance as much as they should be doing. So, and St. Clements is as guilty as anyone else. So please keep that in mind when you turn up on Sunday. Remember, it doesn't all end when the service ends. And hello, Kit. On Wednesday, the 25th, we will be celebrating communion for Thanksgiving. So that's Wednesday, not the Thursday. Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. And it will be live streamed. Over to you.
Oh, okay. And believe it or not, we have come to the end of the Sermon on the Mount. But before we end today, we wanted to go back and kind of recap what we've done over the past 18 weeks. At the very beginning of our sessions together, we looked at what it means to be and how important it is to realize just what an influence that idea is in the person we now are. We looked at the Greco-Roman idea of being and how they work toward a person growing towards an end goal of fulfillment and happiness. We then looked at how Judaism developed a similar philosophy of being, but within a wisdom tradition and with the ultimate goal being moving towards God. From there, we began to look at the background of the Sermon on the Mount and of how Jesus was clearly working within a wisdom flourishing tradition. And then we actually started, after 3 weeks, to look at the Sermon on the Mount.
I like the fall in the sentence. It's like you're depressed. And then we got working on it after 3 weeks.
That was an editorial comment on how long it took us to get to the Sermon on the Mount. And we saw that the Beatitudes that begin in chapter 5, they introduce a wisdom tradition, a looking at Makarios as a way of being. And would you like to define Makarios?
No, I wrote it down for you to define.
I know, and I just saw it and I said, this would be a good place for him to jump in.
Oh, I'm not doing, because I can't remember.
Makarios is a way of looking at the world and looking at,
I'm going to stroke my beard at this point.
oh, yeah, yeah, and looking at the others that are along the path toward wisdom and flourishing, and looking at them and saying, that's a good person. It's a concept of looking in a vertical or a horizontal sense. It's not blessing that comes down from heaven onto an individual, but it's an observational kind of blessing or an observational stance where we look at those other people that we want to emulate.
It's in a positive sense as well.
Yes. Then in the Sermon on the Mount, we get sayings, "You have heard, but I say," and Jesus there is beginning to fulfill the law. If you remember, the concept of fulfilling the law was not to undo it or to set it aside
Or end it.
or end it. Yeah, it was to reinterpret in a broader, deeper sense, and that reinterpretation is what fulfilling the law actually meant in rabbinic Judaism in Jesus' time. It also became the paradigm for observers to look at Jesus and say, he speaks with authority. That ability to enlarge, enrich, and deepen the Torah commandments was seen as a mark of authority. And then we have at the center, we got to the Lord's Prayer, which is a guideline for living. It encapsulates all of what has gone before, and it foreshadows all that's going to be coming after that Lord's Prayer, that central prayer to the sermon and to Christians throughout 2 millennia. Now, one thing to remember is that Jesus was not working in a vacuum, and many of the petitions in the Lord's Prayer reflect liturgical sentences from rabbinic Judaism. So he's not working in a vacuum, but he's taking his tradition and saying, look at this, look at all these things that we have. This is the way you're going to pray. And then we have examples of the inner and outer way of righteousness, that our righteous acts must be reflecting an inner disposition of righteousness also.
Thomas has written that we've taken just as long as it took Jesus to climb the mountain.
You better believe it.
It reminds me of a kind of a horror story of when I was in Lourdes, and Father Victor and myself and an ordinand went to do the Stations of a Cross, which are up the hill. It was not good, but that's for another time. So now we're going to look at the final verses of the Sermon on the Mount, and yes, we really mean it.
I don't believe
I can
we've
hear the
gotten there.
swooning.
Yeah. No, it's the Hallelujah chorus that's
it?
being repeated over
It's
and over.
almost the right time of year.
Yeah.
These final verses sum up all the previous chapters and verses that we've looked at over these several weeks. But they do so from the point of view of us actually living the Sermon on the Mount in the world as we have it. Wisdom is of no use if it isn't practiced. So here's an overview of today's verses. We live in a world of choices. Jesus defines them within 3 categories: the narrow way versus the broad way, the wolf versus the sheep, and fruit being good or bad, along with the tree being good or bad. How do we live this? The truly radical nature of what Jesus is telling us really should astound us and frighten us and enthrall us, I suppose, as well, in its audacity, because we're so used to rules and regulations. This is a way of being that we're being called to. And how we discern what's real from what's false. And we'll see that later on. At the beginning, Jesus ascended the mountain to teach. Now he descends and people are amazed. And this closes the sermon.
So you get a kind of a rounded view, Jesus going up the mountain, the revelation that he is proclaiming, and then he comes down from the mountain, and all these people are quite amazed at what he's been saying and doing, and they follow him.
But there's more.
There's more. Matthew, these are the verses that we're going to look at today.
That wad of paper.
Yes. Matthew 7, 13 and 14. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction. And there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Matthew is shifting to the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount and does so by presenting a stark contrast between two ways of being in the world. One described as a narrow gate and the other as a wide gate and broad path. These two ways of being lead to two opposite places, one to life and the other to destruction. Now, as it's scholars are dispute or are unsettled.
Scholars are divided.
Scholars are divided. There it is. There it is. What this image is really about. Is the idea about two different gates that lead to two different roads? Or is it about whether gates and roads are used as closely comparable images, both making the same point? Whatever the point is clear. Two ways of being are contrasted. One that appears to be the better because it is easy and broad, but turns out to lead to destruction, while the other that is difficult and compressed and uncomfortable, but it actually leads to life. These verses, with their opening imperative, are not merely a description, but an exhortation to enter the way of life. Now, this comes from a Second Temple Jewish way of thinking about entering into the reign of, or the kingdom of God in the age to come. We can see this parallel language in the examples that will follow. And when we were doing this, I started thinking about a Deuteronomical, means something from the book of Deuteronomy, where Joshua addresses the people of Israel as they get ready to enter the promised land. And he says today I set before you the way of life and the way of death, and which will you choose? And Jesus is now giving us these choices. Here is life, here is death, and you can choose.
Thomas, I was desperately trying to think of, I knew there was a poem somewhere, Robert Frost, two roads diverge in the wood, which to take? Yes. Mm-hmm. It's also very kind of Eastern as well, isn't it? The idea of the path, the way of, whatever. There's lots of
walking the way.
Yeah.
And it when you said that, it reminds me that the way is not static. It's not just something that you believe in. It's something that you do. Mm-hmm. You participate. So we see that at the conclusion of the sermon, we have returned to the theme that frames the Beatitudes, and that is most generally generalized statement of the context of Jesus preaching the kingdom of heaven. And for Matthew, that is something that has kind of begun. It's been ushered in to some degree, the beginning, the gate, but it hasn't reached its conclusion.
But it's that thing again, it's not necessarily a place, it's a destination.
Yeah,
and
it's a way of getting to the destination. Yeah. Even though the theme of kingdom is apparent and consistent, this closing exhortation to enter according to the narrow may seem an abrupt shift toward merely external behaviors, unlike the emphasis that Jesus places on the internal wholeness, which he has been picturing throughout the sermon. That is wide and easy and broad sounds like the life of loose morals, while narrow and hard conjure images of piety and self sacrifice and duty. Historically, this text has been read and pictured with images that show the broad way as impious behavior.
Impious.
Yeah, not impious behavior,
How
but
come you didn't correct me yesterday when I read it?
I don't know.
I did say it.
You did?
Yeah. Well,
Well,
I actually said it with emphasis just because I thought you'd pick up and say, no, no. Now, well, I'm doing an even posher English accent. I shouldn't be doing that.
and with the impious action in one way, and then the narrow way depicted as service and Christian duty.
Thomas mentions Rumi and Kate mentions Yogi Berra. Good job, my eyes are good. The first thing I would say is Yogi Bear, but Yogi Berra. And this is, for me, these things are interesting because I've mentioned before that wherever truth is, there is Jesus. So we shouldn't disparage something as not being true because it doesn't have the word Jesus attached to it. So in Eastern mysticism and things like that, there can still be many things that are true and they are of God. And these things we celebrate and rejoice, and they give us a point of contact. And we don't just kind of rubbish it because they don't believe in Jesus. That's my little rant over.
That's good. That's good.
So when we get to this point of the text, and we see about this history of the text being used in ways that may
May or may not be
kind of associate itself with morals more than anything else. There's a kind of that danger. Was it Will Robinson?
Will Robinson.
Yeah. So what's going on here?
Lost in the Sermon on the Mount. Danger.
Lost in the Bible study on the Sermon on the Mount. The worry here is that Jesus has shifted from being concerned about our insides matching our outsides to a kind of more moralistic, you'd better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout, and I'm telling you why.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
I feel so ill now. But it's like, Santa Claus, he has a list, doesn't he? Apparently, if you've been naughty or nice. And what list are you on?
The dog is commenting on this.
What list are you on? Yeah, I know. You know what list you're on. I don't know what list I'm on. Anyway, is Jesus working this way? Not at all. Despite a long Christian devotional tradition of the difference between the narrow gate and the broad way, there was always a moral understanding and of the contrast between the immoral behaviors and the pious practices. So the distinctions made depends on the same internal versus external righteousness that Jesus marked earlier on. Depends on the time of day. Yeah, kind of true, really, isn't it? You don't want to see me in the morning. Let's put it that way. And it's marked the entirety of this sermon. The wide and easy way leads to destruction. And this is precisely what Jesus has been describing all along as living with merely external righteousness. I'm going to do this because it makes me look good, that kind of thing. The narrow and difficult way, on the other hand, is the vision he has. He's cast it for righteousness that is more and deeper and more than just how we behave. It's an internal way of being. The broad and easy way is the way of the Pharisees and the scribes, whose righteousness is easily definable and is expressed solely at the external level. Not committing adultery, not murdering, and so on. It's very black and white. I can't help myself, it's the clergy in me. I think religion, church is incredibly funny. Yes, it certainly is. And clergy are really, really
strange.
Yeah, I'm talking about you, of course.
Oh, of course.
So there's that, it's all black and white rules. Well, I don't do that, so I'm good. That kind of thing. The narrow and difficult way in Jesus' vision is a righteousness that requires really, really deep roots and the exposure of one's whole person to God and leading to true virtue.
We're going to go on to verses 15 to 23. Matthew 7:15 to 23. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many of deeds of power in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers. Many Bibles separate these sets of verses, seemingly thinking that they form two different and distinct pronouncements. But the train of thought and the subject matter actually links them as one. This is the second of the three concluding images, and this one is described in the longest and most complicated of ways.
And it'll be even more complicated.
Yeah, we can make it really complicated. Like the other two images, it relates to us three ways that external righteousness can function, with two ways of doing the will of the Father. We will start off with false prophets, and the theme return to false prophets, with their reward being rejection from God. In the middle, we have the observation about good and bad fruit, and good and bad trees. Wolves and sheep and good and bad fruit trees give us a bucolic, kind of a pastoral, rural insight.
Oh, what a wonderful word. I can't remember the last time I heard that word.
What, bucolic?
Yeah. I think it was describing somebody there.
You mean a sheep?
I think a sheep herd.
Oh. So these metaphors give us an insight into how the hearer of Jesus' teaching, how they would have made sense of it. Being aware of false prophets is the consistent message throughout these verses. In one sense, we cannot connect this theme with the broad and narrow way of previous verses, as the false prophets are the one who, among other things, would mislead people to practice piety along the lines of the broad way, the external way, rather than the narrow way, the internal, the wholehearted way. Within the context of the sermon, false prophets and teachers are defined not so much as ones not speaking the truth, though that is implied, but as those who appear pious, but do not do the true whole person righteousness. Thus, the scribes and Pharisees may well have been the first examples that have come into the minds of those listening to Jesus. This might explain the somewhat unexpected and shocking final words of this passage, "Depart from me, you who work lawlessness." The wording here does not just generally mean those who do evil, as some translations render it.
Like ours.
Yeah.
The New Revised
Rather,
Standard, yeah.
Matthew is directly quoting the Septuagint reading of Psalm 6:8, because it ties into the ironic assertions of the sermon that true law keeping is not simply Torah observance, but obedience to Jesus. And here we find Jesus beginning to point to himself not only as the fulfiller of the law and the prophets, but as being the truth about who God is. Just ponder how startling and shocking that would have sounded. We see this at the most pointed when we read Jesus saying, "Then I will declare to them, I have never known you. Go away from me, you evildoers." Would that I have been missed by those listening to Jesus, or would it have been too subtle, or was it
Can't
quite
imagine.
astounding?
Yeah, I'm sure because they were a well-attuned group of people, they would have really picked up on that. And I can imagine the Pharisees, and anyway, the Pharisees or scribes, they would have been building up their stash of stones
Yeah.
after hearing that. It's just weird. Now we take a look at the tree fruit imagery, and we can note that this powerful wisdom metaphor has already been utilized by none other than John the Baptist's message about the necessity of producing fruit worthy of repentance. That's way back in chapter 3, I think.
Yeah.
It will reappear later on in chapter 12, where Jesus is in a sharp conflict with the Pharisees, when he will use this same universal point about trees and fruit to refute their desperate argument against him that he is casting out demons by the power of the demonic world, by Beelzebub. Now, Jesus continues the logic in this chapter, in chapter 12, and he takes what the Pharisees say, and then he puts in this kind of way. It's either put up or shut up. That is, declare the tree healthy and its fruit good, or declare the tree diseased and its fruit bad, because, to continue the logic of the metaphor, by the fruit the tree is known. So if Jesus is doing all these healings, where's it coming from? Are these good things? Well, yes. So how come you're saying I'm of the devil then?
It's interesting that when Jesus refutes the teachings and the perspectives of the Pharisees and the scribes, he doesn't go, "You're wrong." He puts it in terms of, which one is it? Is it this possibility, or is it this possibility? Is the coin, what is the coin? What is the head on the coin?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Caesar, or is it supposed to be to the temple? He doesn't. He gives them the choice, and he puts the burden on them.
See you, Thomas. Take care. At this point, we need to look at a particular Greek word, I'm afraid. And the word is a verb, and it's poieo. It can basically be translated as make or do. But here it's rendered slightly differently, as declare, because of the speaking context of the verses. Putting it this way, though, strengthens the logical inference that growing thing produces according to their nature, either good or bad. Either my works are truly good, Jesus is saying, and therefore I am good, or my works are truly bad, and therefore I am bad. But Houston, we have a problem. How, or, and why? Because is it really true that we can discern who a person really is by their fruit? 7 verse 16 teaches that one will be able to recognize false prophets by their actions.
Will be.
Yes. Even as one can discern the health or diseased nature and state of a tree by its fruit. John the Baptist and Jesus both use this clear image of the tree and fruit to make the same point. The difficulty here is that this image seems to break down precisely in its application to false prophets, not real prophets, false ones. That is, it is the doing of false works that appear to be good that makes a false prophet false.
Wolves are precisely most dangerous when they become or when they appear to be sheep. Therefore, one cannot actually tell a false prophet by his or her actions. Prophesying, casting out demons, performing mighty works, being able to do these things is precisely what makes them successful as a false prophet. Therefore, one cannot actually tell a false prophet by their actions. So, how can this teaching of Jesus make sense? How can this teaching frame Jesus' actual work? Well, the solution comes when we remember that what Jesus is speaking about is contained within his ongoing message and requirement of wholeness, that both the internal and external are together essential. We also may need to be reminded that this is not an all or nothing moment of living and judging, but of a growing and flourishing that takes time. Jesus is requiring of us to recognize that there's an eventuality,
Eventualness.
which is the same as eventuality.
No, it isn't. It's an eventual. Eventuality is something that's going to happen in the distance. And eventualness is that it's growing.
Are we going to have another lesson in the English language?
Well, seems though you don't speak it, I guess.
Oh dear. Well, the eventualness
Yes.
of our ability to discern inner truth. As with a tree, the fruit does not appear immediately, but eventually.
Eventually, yes. It's in the process. It's in becoming.
Yeah, that's what I just said. So it is with false prophets.
Oh, that was such a good diss.
So sooner or later, and most definitely, come this understanding of good and bad prophets will come with the return of Christ. The false prophet and the wolf will be shown for those who they really are. Now, this could become something of a problem for those people who are naturally self-reflective. They might well think, am I such a person? But Jesus mentions all of this because we tend to be naturally enamored by the whiz-bang flash of people's external gifts and behaviors, while ignoring often flagrant signs that they might not actually be all they claim to be.
Yeah, we started thinking about why some pastors seem to be listened to, and it tends to be within the framework of their church has many members. They are wealthy, and that's about it, really, isn't it? It's not that they have any real biblical credentials, that they've done something to sort of open up Scripture in a marvelous way that no one's ever seen before. Because all the biblical scholars who do all that kind of work and do it over decades of research and care, their books don't tend to be bestsellers.
They're a little more difficult to read.
And we also have a whole bunch of televangelists who, if you know any of the background of their life, it belies who they pretend to be on screen. It's that bad.
So this last thing is the last thing that we need to do is to note that those whom Jesus calls out don't seem that surprised. They try to justify themselves, which is not something to be recommended.
It's kind of strange when you think about it. They just go, but didn't we do all these things? And he says, I don't know you. Which is, again, kind of scary, which is why these naturally self-reflective people, I'm trying to do God's will, but am I sure I'm doing it?
Yeah.
Well, those people, they're saying, I am doing God's will, but the inside of them doesn't care about the rationale behind it. Mm-hmm. And so to Matthew 7:24 through 27. Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Now, children, we know a song about this, don't we? Well, I forgot how it goes now. The
wise man built his house upon a rock. The wise man built his house upon a rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rains came tumbling down.
And
The rains came down, and the floods came up. The rains came down, and the floods came up. The rains came down, and the floods came up.
and the house on the rock
Stood still.
Oh yes, now we've copywritten this video. It's
Yes.
never going to appear again. How many million years ago is it since I last sang that? But it just goes to show how music can teach you
Yeah.
scripture.
Yep.
So we all know that these verses, the biblical verses, comprise an invitation to wisdom practiced, Christ-centered, kingdom-shaped, eschatologically orientated, wise living, don't we?
Now that was
just
quite a
sang about
mouthful.
Yeah, we just think that's what we just think about when it was
Yeah.
like 10-year-old. Well, no, it wouldn't be me because I
Oh,
didn't start going
6
to
or
church.
7, yeah.
I didn't start going to church. I was like 14. So.
I remember it from Vacation Bible School.
Just think of the theology that's loaded into those words there. So, and that all because of all this, which is why we've got applause. Oh, thank you. We'll be taking a hat around afterwards, the virtual hat. So the thing here is practical wisdom, hence the word wise. As was very common back in the day, Jesus uses two types of people or things to compare and then contrast, which leaves an open question, an invitation of a question. Which one are you? The choice Jesus gives us is between phronimos and moros. In English, wise one or moron. It's as brutal as that. Phronimos is an important word for the Greek virtue tradition, and it was also important for St. Matthew. He uses it a bunch of times. In the virtue tradition, this term refers to one who has learned through practice to live prudently, with discernment, and who not only knows the truth, but acts upon it.
I think it's interesting to note that it's the wise person learns this through practice. It's not intelligence that just kind of comes upon someone, but it's through practicing the way of righteousness.
So it belies that saying, wisdom comes with grey hair. It's just, I mean, I've met enough barking, weird, grey-haired people, so I know it's not true. And looking in the mirror,
Well, see, there is
no,
one.
it's not true.
There is one advantage to not having hair.
Yeah, nobody can tell. You're undecided. Your hair tells me your
I'm
lack of hair.
ambivalent.
You're on the fence.
I'm ambivalent.
Oh dear. So within this theme of wisdom, there's an emphasis on the foundation. See, the house may look wonderful. It may have all these curlicues and beautiful windows and vistas and everything. But what's it built on? As the Canadian the builder, Mike Holmes says, just looking at the outside of a building, it may look fantastic, but that's all lipstick and mascara. What's underneath? What are the studs like? What's under the floor? What's the foundation like?
This reminded me of the musical joke. What's the difference between a coloratura soprano and a pig? Lipstick and mascara.
I wonder if any professional singers will now be
Oh,
insulted.
maybe they will.
Now, a Pharisee may fast, may give alms, may pray all the time, but what's going on underneath? A Christian may look all pious and faithful, and they may do all these charitable things here, there, and everywhere. But what happens when a storm in life hits them? How do they react? How do they live? How do they withstand it? How do they grow? So part of this is to do with one's image of who God is as well. We should note here that building something is involved. The wise person doesn't move into something already built. Hey, Candy, good to see you. And this reminds us of Jesus' emphasis on putting into practice his teachings, of us being doers of the word, not merely hearers. In the Greek of this sermon, this doing aspect is communicated through the recurrent use of the word poieo, a word which is, yes, you've guessed, not easy to translate into English. This verb can be rendered into English in many ways, including do, make, bear, as in bearing fruit, produce, declare, and practice. Back in 6:1, we were told that disciples need to practice, do their righteousness. And when we get to 7:12, we find that again, the golden rule asks, whatever you would want people to do to you or for you, then in the same way, treat, do to them. So this final image and the accompanying song, thank you very much, requires us to do, which makes it a good thing. Well, it actually makes a good thing that the song's an action song. If we just sang it without doing anything.
I know, you have to put the actions in.
And we didn't practice that, by the way. That was spontaneous. We should have done harmonies, though.
Well, that wouldn't be spontaneous.
No, it wouldn't, no.
No.
Oh, no. We'll do a reprise at the end of the show to fade out.
So now we have come to the textual end of the sermon. Now, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as their scribes. When he had come down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. This is a wonderful example of how the addition of chapter and verses in scriptures can be a bad thing, because the chapter markings here would have us liable to miss the closure of the Sermon on the Mount and how it turns full circle. It's the example is the people recognize that he has authority and he doesn't teach as their scribes, and then we have the actual conclusion, which is in chapter 8, and he came down from the mountain.
And it's only a part of a verse.
Yeah, he came down from the mountain, and many, many people followed him. And that you miss if you look at it only in terms of here's chapter 7, here's where chapter 7 stops, and here's where chapter 8 begins.
Yeah, like on a normal Wednesday morning Bible study, we try and do a full chapter. It often happens that we just do like a verse, but that's
Why was that?
me being Gabby.
The rabbit hole?
No. Me
Oh,
just
never,
being able
never.
Me being able to go on about one word is the reason why.
Yeah. 37,
Even
37.
The dog approved that message.
Yes, he does.
But so we would have gone through chapter 7, say, and then we would have stopped. And it would have been an incomplete conclusion, which would have been kind of bad, really.
So this closure to the Sermon on the Mount kind of makes a full circle. Jesus is finished. The crowds are astonished. Jesus has authority as others did not, the scribes. He came down the mountain as opposed to when he ascended the mountain, and great crowds followed him. So we have that kind of arc where Jesus goes up the mountain to be the revelation,
Sits down.
sits down to teach, and then he becomes the revelation because he's on a high mountain, which is a
Metaphor of
it's a physical
the presence of God, isn't it?
Yeah, it's for the Jews. It wasn't just a metaphor, because temples and sanctuaries were always built on top of hills because it was closer to heaven, I think is the idea.
I wonder why the ziggurats and stuff were built to get them nearer to God.
Yeah, to get them up in the heavens. The crowds were used to hearing religious teachings from their scribes, but were more normally kind of, okay. Matthew is making a contrast.
A normal Sunday morning sermon.
Yeah, when people go out and go to the bathroom. Matthew is making a contrast between the unauthoritative scribes and the authoritative Jesus. And Jesus says, you have heard it said, but I tell you. So he's expanding upon the meaning of the law. And that would have carried no weight with the listeners unless he had and possessed that authority, that that spark that you can understand and see when someone begins to talk. Jesus' call was to true wisdom flourishing based on building one's life on his words. Not an academic sense of studying them, but of doing and living them. Thus, to have gone up on the mountain with Jesus, to go on a journey to meet the divine, was one thing. But then to have to come down that mountain would have wondered whether you had really just met the divine, but in Jesus himself. Of all of this will become clearer later when Jesus sends his disciples out with the same authority to preach and heal as he had. With all of Jesus' talk of heaven and earth and the kingdom of God is near, we can see how it was to be understood. Jesus himself is the living embodiment of the kingdom. His teachings truly are the words of everlasting life. But as the Sermon on the Mount teaches us, these words only become life for us when we begin to live them, knowing the cost, knowing their depth, knowing the incredible value and gift they possess, and knowing the Word of God who gave them to us. We have just ended the Sermon on the Mount. Are there questions?
Are there questions? We have concluded with Jesus being the center of all, which is as it should be. And it's taken us 19 weeks to get here. I hope you've enjoyed the journey. And you have gotten something out of it, if only a laugh or two, and a better understanding of the English language.
And a better pronunciation of the English language.
I have a question, and it is to do with language.
Okay.
And it could be that the way
Excuse me.
it's written and pronounced in American English is different. You said authoritative and unauthoritative. It's not authoritative.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I'm just wondering if
You're just being a
pendant, a pedant.
pedant.
So, any questions? No question. Just thank you. Oh, well, thank you, Kit, because you're the originator of us doing. I suspect you didn't think it would take quite as long.
19 weeks?
And maybe not going to, but after having seen somebody do the whole of them, the whole of the Beatitudes in one sermon, which included mostly to do with being on a helicopter, I think this really puts us in the place to ask that question as to which road we're going to follow, and how serious are we in our intent in following Christ. We can't just put it on and take it off like a kind of fashion accessory. And unfortunately, a lot of Christianity nowadays is a lifestyle option.
We were talking yesterday about having done this study on the Sermon on the Mount, and I remarked that we did not do this kind of investigation when I was in seminary. We got kind of an overview and little dips into here and there about words and how they were translated and so on, but we never really started to talk about what is the point of Matthew's gospel, or what is the point of Luke's gospel, or Mark's gospel, John's gospel. And as you were saying, Matthew, this gave me a real insight into Matthew's his mindset, what he was trying to do, the images he was using, and all of a sudden it just came to me just a moment ago that his Christmas narrative about the wise men, they are following a way.
Oh.
They are journeying from one place to another.
Nimbus time. Yeah, I never thought of that that way.
No, I'd never thought about it.
We now know Matthew is consistent and detail orientated enough to do that
Uh-huh.
from the get go, isn't he?
And
Wow, that's marvelous.
and the wise men were looking for the new king, the new kingdom.
Yes. And they saw it in the sky, which was to do with the heavens.
Yep. The sign, the star.
Gosh. Yes. Well, don't go crazy, Kit. Just say wise people. Yeah, Kit says, I must confess, I thought it might be a bit shorter, but no matter. I'm very grateful. See how I interpreted that with a kind of bitter tone.
Sarcasm.
I know it's
served your
not
daily.
there. It's what the English are very good at doing. That's all.
I was watching a documentary last night about Durham Cathedral in England, and the commentator was taking us around the cathedral and so on, and he showed something that when we were there, I just didn't see. It didn't register on my mind, but the bishop's throne, and it kind of made me think about the outward and the inward virtue and righteousness. And the bishop who had that throne built sent a person from his monastery to Rome to measure the height of the Pope's throne in Rome. And then when he got back and had the number, he added 1 foot to it. So he would be 1 foot higher than the Pope.
Oh, wow.
And then the commentator said that these days no bishop will sit in it. They have a place in the choir, and it's
Because they're ever so humble.
be it humbly in his service.
Yeah. When I was at Canterbury Cathedral, when I was still a student, Father Victor and another friend of mine, Father Brian, we were priests then. We were just seminarians, I suppose. And we went for a day trip to Canterbury Cathedral. Now, my friend Brian, he's got this very deep, resonant voice, and he can't really whisper. Somehow we found ourselves behind the chains for the sanctuary in Canterbury Cathedral, where the bishop's throne, the archbishop's throne is, and we were in trouble anyway. So Brian decided he'd sit on this throne, and in his non-whisper said, "One day all this will be mine," and it just went around the cathedral, and everybody stopped to look where his voice came from. Oh, good days.
Yes.
And then we got thrown out.
And excommunicated.
Oh, if only. Oh, wow. So any more questions, any observations, any insights that you've gained from what you've heard and what we've read together? We have 7 minutes that you can speak.
Well, while we're waiting for them to type their questions, why don't we continue and talk about next week?
Ah, yes, you.
Oh, me.
Well, yeah.
Well,
it's
next
your
week.
idea.
Next week we're not.
Next week, there's nothing.
Yeah, because Thursday is Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
and you're giving thanks that the mouths are being shut. But the week after that, we'll start with our Advent course, and it's going to be on the creeds, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, Athanasian Creed. There are several creedal statements that we have historically, and what made me think about this was people say the creed, and you can tell just by looking at their faces that they're not really sure what it is they're talking about. And so I thought we would break down the creed. The Nicene Creed is in 3 parts, and each part reflects one part of the Trinity.
So Father Lewis will be leading this for the 3.
No, he won't.
For the 3 Thursdays of, it's just 3 we can do, isn't it?
Yeah.
For this year. Yes, you will. It's your idea. I'll be interested to see where we go with this.
Yeah.
The creeds are essential. Will there be a Thanksgiving service? Yes, 7 p.m. on the Wednesday. There won't be any on, but that will be live streamed 7 p.m. Wednesday. But there won't be one on the Thursday. I'll be too stuffed with chicken by then. Not chicken, turkey.
Mm-hmm.
The dog will as well. He keeps moving, but I never hear him. I just hear him because he's fast asleep now.
Okay, pay attention to the camera.
Yes, sorry. Got a remark from the dog again. Sheesh. Yes, the creeds are. They try to put in a very pithy way everything we believe.
Mm-hmm.
Will Advent classes be at the same time a continuation of? Yes, they will. Yes, we will be doing our work on a Wednesday and going down rabbit holes, and we will be bringing you the distillation of a whole day of arguing in an hour at 3 o'clock on Thursday. Yeah, so it'll be good fun. I've not really looked at the creeds for a long time. I remember doing the history of the creeds with all the fighting, and I think one of the things we did, I showed you the painting that somebody made of, who was it? Saint somebody whacking somebody in the face during
The Nicene Council.
Nicene Council as they were trying to formulate everything. And, it's like, nowadays we'd have the photograph, but this is a painting of somebody, I can't remember who it was now, whacking somebody in the face. I disagree with you, sir. See how they loved one another.
The history professor at Nashotah House made a comment about the Nicene Council, and he said, for most Christians today, the creeds are really kind of an abstract thing. They don't see the importance of them. But he said in Constantinople during the council, even the taxi drivers were talking about this.
Oh, wow. Have you heard the latest?
Yeah.
Wow.
Bishop so-and-so said such and such.
But the main contention now is the addition of a word which took place sometime later. Yes, which
8th or 9th century?
Pope Leo, wasn't it?
The filioque.
And the filioque clause. Yeah.
It's just one word.
Yeah. Filioque.
Yeah, filioque.
Through the...
With the Son.
With the Son. And it caused a big disruption. And I believe the Roman Church now have removed it in their latest liturgies.
I don't know. I have not looked. Although the Canterbury has suggested that we remove it.
Really?
Yeah. And it's kind of now up to diocesan whims.
Justin Welsby, well known for his theological acumen.
Oh no, this came before him.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
No, okay. I know it's always. I know some churches that took it out anyway. It caused such a split that.
Well, it split the Eastern and Western Church.
And some churches were anathematized, and they're kind of almost back. I mean, the Pope and a few other bishops of some of the Eastern churches are kind of in communion-ishness again. It's stupid, isn't it?
But the
nobody goes to hell because of not believing that one thing.
But when a Western Christian converts, or like a priest or a deacon or someone involved in church politics, converts to the Orthodox Church, they have this ceremony where they ask them questions. It's kind of like a test, and they ask them if they believe the heretical doctrine of the filioque clause, and you have to say, no, I do not, or you are not received into the Orthodox Church.
It's a bit like when I came over here and became a priest in the Episcopal Church. I had to renounce the Queen and all foreign bishops.
As well you should.
That was kind of easy, really. Well, it is now 4 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us. We do hope, honestly, we do hope that it's increased your faith and your wonderment of God's work and His Word, as expressed in Jesus. It really has done me. It's yes. I've really enjoyed being able to put the work in, and thank you for giving me the ability to do that. So thank you, Kit. Thank you all for taking part. It's really good to know that people are watching, and it would be, because it's live, it's better than doing it as a recording.
Yeah.
We get the feedback, so we really appreciate your feedback over the weeks. So take care of yourselves as always. Maybe see you on Sunday. If not, you will see us
On Wednesday night,
on the recording, or maybe at the drive-through.
the live stream Thanksgiving service.
And then there's the Wednesday. So there's lots of options. So until then, take care and God bless.
God bless.